Most divorces don't begin in courtrooms, they begin in silence. Long before the papers are signed, something far more important has already ended. The hidden truth. There is a quiet separation that happens years before any lawyer is called. No shouting, no slammed doors, no dramatic betrayal, just a slow, emotional evacuation. Two people can still share a bed, raise children, and smile for photos, while no longer inhabiting the same relationship. Psychologists have a term for this kind of erosion: emotional disengagement. It's what happens when connection is replaced by coexistence, when partnership becomes logistics, when love stops being something you feel and becomes something you remember. This is the silent divorce, and by the time most people notice it, it's already complete. How it begins. It doesn't start with hatred. Hatred would actually be easier. It starts with emotional micro-withdrawals. Conversations become shorter. Curiosity about each other fades. Touch loses intention and becomes habit, or disappears entirely. You still talk about schedules, bills, and kids, but the conversations that once made you feel seen stop happening. Not because anyone decided to stop caring, but because caring stopped feeling rewarding. This is hedonic adaptation at work. The brain acclimates to what's familiar. What once felt meaningful becomes neutral. What becomes neutral eventually feels invisible, and invisibility is corrosive. A vignette picture this. A couple sits at the kitchen table late at night. The house is quiet. The kids are asleep. 10 years ago, this hour was sacred. They talked about dreams, fears, the future. Now, one scrolls through a phone. The other stares into a mug that's gone cold. They aren't angry. They aren't even sad. They're somewhere worse. They're disengaged. If one of them stood up and left the room, the other might not even look up. That's not peace. That's absence. The psychological shift. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't leave relationships because they're unhappy. They leave because they feel unnecessary. Humans are wired to seek emotional reciprocity, the sense that our presence matters, that our inner world affects someone else. When that feedback loop disappears, the psyche goes into preservation mode. Attachment theory explains this well. When emotional bids are repeatedly unmet, people stop making them. When bids stop, connection decays. When connection decays, commitment becomes symbolic rather than lived. The relationship doesn't explode, it evaporates. Why it goes unnoticed. The silent divorce hides behind responsibility. Work gets busy. Kids need attention. Life becomes demanding. And so the emotional distance feels justified. We're just tired. This is a phase. Things will get better when life slows down. But life doesn't slow down. And emotional neglect doesn't stay neutral. It compounds. What looks like stability on the outside is often just inertia. Two people moving forward because stopping would require confrontation. The illusion of safety. This is the most dangerous part. Because nothing seems wrong, nobody acts. There's no emergency, no obvious crisis, no reason to sound the alarm. So the silent divorce is allowed to finish its work uninterrupted. By the time one person finally says, "I'm not happy anymore," what they really mean is, "I left a long time ago. I just didn't tell you." And here's the part no one prepares you for. The moment emotional disengagement sets in, the relationship enters a point of no return. Not because of betrayal or conflict, but because of something far quieter. In the next chapter, we'll explore the exact moment couples stop repairing damage and why that moment is so easy to miss. The most dangerous moment in a marriage isn't the first big fight. It's the moment no one tries to fix the small ones. The invisible shift. Every healthy relationship relies on a quiet, often unnoticed mechanism. Repair. Repair is what happens after tension. A glance, a joke, a soft apology, a hand on the back that says, "We're still on the same side." Psychologists call these repair attempts, small signals meant to restore emotional balance. And here's the key insight. Conflict doesn't kill relationships. The absence of repair does. When repair disappears, damage accumulates silently, not dramatically, incrementally, like rust under paint. Why silence feels like progress. This is where most couples misread the situation. The arguments stop, the tension drops, the house feels calmer. And one partner, often the man, thinks, "Good, we're finally past the hard part." But what's actually happening is something far more ominous. One person didn't find peace. They found emotional withdrawal. They stopped arguing because arguing requires hope. Hope that being heard might change something. Hope that repair is possible. When hope dies, so does conflict. A vignette. Think about the last time you disagreed. You made a comment. She didn't respond. Not angrily, not defensively. Just nothing. No pushback, no clarification, no follow-up later. You might have felt relieved, but what if that silence wasn't acceptance? What if it was resignation? Because when someone stops correcting you, they're often no longer invested in being understood. The psychology behind it. Here's what's happening inside the brain. Humans operate on a simple emotional economy. Effort is spent where return is expected. When return disappears, investment stops. This is emotional cost-benefit analysis, and it happens unconsciously. If every attempt to explain, connect, or resolve leads to dismissal, defensiveness, minimization, the nervous system learns a lesson. Engagement is expensive. Withdrawal is safer. So, the mind adapts, not with drama, but with distance. Why this stage is so dangerous? Because everything still functions. Bills get paid, kids get picked up, plans get made, but the emotional feedback loop is broken. There's no more. Did that land wrong? I didn't mean it that way. Can we reset? Instead, there's quiet bookkeeping. Every disappointment gets logged. Every unmet need gets stored. Every repair that didn't happen becomes evidence. And the partner who's withdrawing doesn't announce it. They just stop trying. The illusion of maturity. This stage is often mistaken for growth. Friends might say, "At least you don't fight anymore." But emotional maturity isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of repair. When repair is gone, calm is not peace. It's a ceasefire where one side has already surrendered and the other doesn't even know the war is over. The asymmetry problem. Here's what makes this phase especially cruel. The person who disengages knows. They feel it. The person who remains hopeful doesn't. So time becomes asymmetric. One partner is emotionally living 6 months or 6 years in the future. The other is still operating in the past. By the time the truth surfaces, the emotional distance feels sudden, but it wasn't. It was just quiet. Once repair disappears, something else begins to form. A space, a private world. Not necessarily an affair, not yet, but a life that no longer requires the relationship to feel complete. In the next chapter, we'll uncover the moment emotional privacy turns into emotional exit and why it's almost impossible to detect in real time. Mini hook. Every relationship ends twice, first in private, then in public. By the time the second one happens, the first has been complete for a long time. The subtle turn. After repair disappears, something else quietly takes its place. A private life, not secrecy, not betrayal, at least not yet. At first it looks harmless, even healthy. More independence, more me time, more space to think, and in isolation, none of this is wrong. But here's the psychological shift most people miss. The relationship is no longer where emotional processing happens. And once that happens, the marriage stops being a home and becomes a role. Privacy versus secrecy. There's a critical distinction here. Privacy says, this is mine, but it still belongs to us. Secrecy says, this exists outside of you. The line between the two is crossed quietly. She starts sharing less. Not because she's hiding something, but because she's no longer orienting toward you. Her inner dialogue changes. She processes emotions alone. She resolves conflicts internally. She imagines futures without checking if you're in them. The relationship stops being the reference point, a vignette. She joins a new gym, starts walking more, finds a new routine that doesn't involve you. She seems lighter, calmer, more distant. You ask how her day was. You get a summary, not a story. You ask what she's thinking. She says nothing. And technically, she's telling the truth because she already thought it through. Without you. The psychology of compartmentalization. This is where compartmentalization comes in. The human mind has an extraordinary ability to separate roles. Partner, parent, individual, professional. When emotional repair fails repeatedly, the mind adapts by isolating the pain. One compartment becomes the marriage. Another becomes the self. And the more rewarding the self compartment becomes, the less necessary the marriage feels. Not hated, just irrelevant. This is how someone can still show up, still perform love, still meet obligations, while emotionally exiting. The two timelines. Problem. Here's the asymmetry no one prepares you for. The person disengaging is months or years ahead emotionally. They've already grieved the relationship, justified their withdrawal, imagined life on the other side. The partner who's still present is living in the shared present, unaware that the other person has quietly moved on. So when the truth finally surfaces, it feels sudden, but it wasn't. It was planned in silence. Why this stage is almost invisible? Because nothing obvious is wrong. No cheating, no explosive fights, no ultimatums, just a subtle emotional decoupling. And the more peaceful it looks on the surface, the deeper the separation underneath. This is why so many people say, I never saw it coming. Because what they were looking for, anger, betrayal, chaos, never showed up. What showed up instead was calm, and calm can be deceiving. The dangerous shift. Once the private life is established, something irreversible happens. The relationship is no longer a source of meaning, it's maintenance. And maintenance doesn't inspire desire. It doesn't spark curiosity. It doesn't generate longing. It just exists. And when a relationship becomes a role, it becomes replaceable. And nowhere is this shift more visible or more misunderstood than in the bedroom. Because when emotional presence leaves, intimacy doesn't always disappear. It transforms. In the next chapter, we'll explore how sex becomes negotiation, why desire turns transactional, and what that change really means. The bedroom doesn't go quiet all at once. It changes tone, and most people don't notice the difference until it's too late. The misunderstood shift. Contrary to popular belief, sex is rarely the first thing to disappear. What disappears first is presence. Intimacy continues, but it becomes procedural, scheduled, predictable, efficient. What once felt like desire now feels like obligation. Not forced, just managed. This is the phase where couples tell themselves, at least we're still intimate. But intimacy without emotional presence isn't connection, it's compliance. Maintenance intimacy. Psychologists sometimes describe this as maintenance intimacy, sex that exists to keep the peace, avoid confrontation, prevent questions, maintain the image of closeness. It's not manipulative, it's adaptive. When emotional connection has faded, physical intimacy becomes the last visible proof that the relationship still exists. So it's preserved, even as it loses its soul. A vignette. He initiates. She doesn't reject him, but she doesn't lean in either. Her body is there. Her mind is elsewhere. Eye contact fades faster than it used to. Touch lands, but doesn't linger. Afterward, she rolls over quickly. He lies awake, wondering why something that once felt bonding now feels hollow. Nothing is technically wrong, but something is missing. Attachment in motion. This is where attachment theory quietly takes the wheel. One partner senses distance and moves closer, seeking reassurance through intimacy. The other feels overwhelmed and pulls back, using distance to regulate. The more one pursues, the more the other withdraws, and sex becomes the battleground where these dynamics play out. Not consciously, but relentlessly. From desire to negotiation. Over time, intimacy becomes conditional. I'm tired. Maybe this weekend. Can we just cuddle? Each phrase is reasonable on its own, but together they form a pattern. Sex is no longer an expression of desire. It's a negotiation of effort, timing, and emotional cost. And negotiations don't create passion. They create resentment. Why this confuses the loyal partner. Here's the cruel irony. The partner who stays emotionally present often believes, if we keep being intimate, we're still connected. So they try harder, they plan, they initiate, they accommodate. But effort doesn't restore desire. Presence does. And presence can't be negotiated. The quiet resentment loop. For the withdrawing partner, sex starts to feel like another expectation, another obligation, another reminder of a connection they no longer feel. So resentment builds, not because intimacy is wrong, but because it no longer aligns with their internal reality. They feel pressured to perform a closeness they don't experience, and pressure kills what little desire remains. The illusion of progress. From the outside, nothing looks broken. There's no affair, no refusal, no dramatic decline. But emotionally, the bedroom has become a checkpoint, not a sanctuary. And once intimacy loses its emotional anchor, it starts generating something dangerous. A story, a narrative that explains why things feel wrong. The turning point. Because humans don't live in ambiguity for long. When desire fades, the mind looks for reasons. And that's when the internal script begins to form. We've grown apart. Something's missing. This isn't how love is supposed to feel. These thoughts don't stay abstract. They crystallize. And once they do, the relationship enters its most dangerous phase. Not withdrawal, but justification. Because the moment intimacy stops feeling natural, the mind starts rewriting the past to explain the present. In the next chapter, we'll expose the story people tell themselves to escape guilt, and how that story becomes more powerful than truth itself. When feelings change, the mind doesn't ask why. It asks, how do I explain this to myself without breaking? So it starts rewriting. Why the mind needs a story. Human beings can tolerate pain. What we can't tolerate is meaningless pain. When emotional connection fades, the psyche scrambles to restore coherence. Not truth, coherence. This is where cognitive dissonance comes in. Cognitive dissonance is the tension between I am a good person and I'm thinking about leaving someone who hasn't obviously wronged me. That tension is unbearable, so the mind resolves it the only way it knows how, by changing the story, always, never, ever. These words aren't accusations yet, they're scaffolding. The mind is building a narrative sturdy enough to support an exit, a vignette. She looks at old photos, vacations, birthdays, anniversaries. At one point, these images felt warm. Now they feel distant. Instead of remembering how she felt then, she overlays how she feels now. And the mind draws a dangerous conclusion. If I feel empty now, I must have been empty then too. I just didn't know it. Memory isn't a recording, it's a reconstruction. And reconstruction bends toward emotional survival, the evidence collector. Once the story begins, the brain shifts into confirmation mode. This is confirmation bias at work. Every forgotten text, every late night, every moment of emotional mismatch. They're no longer isolated incidents. They become a pattern, and patterns become proof. The partner hasn't changed. The lens has. Why good memories start to vanish. Here's the disturbing part. Positive memories don't disappear by accident. They're inconvenient. A loving history creates hesitation. Hesitation creates doubt. And doubt threatens the exit. So the psyche does what it must. It downplays joy. It amplifies pain. It reframes effort as control. It reframes stability as stagnation. Not out of malice, out of necessity. The moral flip eventually. The narrative crosses a threshold. She's no longer someone leaving, she's someone escaping, and escape requires a villain. So flaws harden into character judgments. He wasn't just distracted, he was neglectful. He wasn't steady, he was boring. He wasn't protective, he was controlling. This isn't lying in the traditional sense. It's self-justifying perception. The truth bends to preserve identity. Why talking doesn't fix it. This is the stage where conversations feel impossible. You bring facts, she brings feelings, you bring timelines, she brings conclusions, and no amount of evidence can compete with a story that protects the self. Because at this point, the relationship problem isn't relational, it's existential. Admitting the relationship was good would mean admitting, I am choosing uncertainty over stability, and that's too heavy to carry. The quiet lock-in. Once the story solidifies, something irreversible happens. She stops asking questions, stops seeking understanding, stops checking her perceptions against reality, because the narrative is no longer exploratory, it's defensive. And defensive stories don't want answers, they want resolution. And here's the cruel irony. Right when the internal story says, I'm done, her external behavior often becomes calmer, kinder, lighter. In the next chapter, we'll reveal why emotional exits often look like sudden improvement, and how kindness can be the final disguise of goodbye. Just when you think things are finally getting better, they're actually ending, and that's what makes this phase so devastating. The calm that lies. This is the stage that confuses everyone. She's calmer, kinder, less reactive. Arguments fade, tension softens, the air feels lighter, and you think, maybe we turned a corner. But what you're actually witnessing is not reconnection, it's emotional closure. Why kindness returns. Once the internal decision is made, something shifts. The conflict is over, not because it was resolved, but because it no longer matters. Anger requires attachment. Frustration requires hope. But indifference is peaceful. So she becomes polite. considerate, even affectionate at times, not to pull you back, but to manage guilt. Guilt Management 101. Psychologically, this is a self-regulation phase. The mind is preparing to do something that violates its self-image, so it compensates. If I'm kind, I'm not cruel. If I'm gentle, I'm not destructive. If I'm calm, this must be right. This is how the psyche stays intact while the relationship dissolves. Not consciously, but effectively. A vignette. She laughs at your jokes again, touches your arm in passing, asks how your day was. You feel hope flicker, so you lean in. You plan a date, you open up, you try. And she responds warmly, but vaguely. Present, but not invested. Engaged, but not anchored. You're chasing a reflection, not a return. Intermittent reinforcement. Here's where it gets dangerous. Her warmth isn't consistent. It comes in waves, just enough closeness to keep you trying, just enough distance to keep her free. Psychology calls this intermittent reinforcement, the most addictive behavioral pattern known to the brain. It's the same mechanism behind gambling. Unpredictable reward creates obsession, not love. Why men misread this phase? Because effort finally seems to be working. You say the right things. She softens. You give space. She warms up. You show strength. She smiles. It feels like progress, but it isn't. It's a farewell tour. She's being kind because she's already gone. The emotional asymmetry deepens. By now, the gap between you is vast. You're fighting for the relationship. She's organizing her exit. You're re-engaging emotionally. She's detaching cleanly. And because her behavior isn't cruel, you don't brace for impact. You relax. And that's when the floor gives way. The moment. Everything breaks. Eventually, she says it. Calmly. Softly. I think we should talk. And the conversation doesn't feel like a discussion. It feels like a decision being delivered. No debate, no confusion, no anger, just certainty. Because by the time indifference arrives, the relationship isn't dying. It's already dead. In the final chapter, we'll confront the real divorce, the one that happens when emotion disappears completely, and why nothing you do at that stage can bring it back. Anger feels like rejection. Silence feels like abandonment. But indifference is extinction. What indifference really means. By the time indifference sets in, the relationship is no longer breaking. It's already over. Anger still carries attachment. Disappointment still carries hope. Even resentment still says, "You matter enough to hurt me." Indifference says something else entirely. You no longer affect me. And psychologically, that is the true divorce. The emotional flatline. This is the phase that shocks people the most. You finally show up fully. You listen. You apologize. You change. And she watches you with a calm, distant expression. Not cold, not cruel, just unmoved. Your pain doesn't anger her. Your effort doesn't excite her. Your fear doesn't scare her, because her emotional nervous system has already shut the door. A vignette. You sit across from her at the table. You're explaining how serious you are, how you'll do anything, how you didn't realize how bad it was. She nods. She thanks you for sharing. She says she understands. But her eyes don't search your face anymore. They're already looking past you, not because she hates you, because she's done. Why nothing works at this stage. Here's the brutal psychological truth. You cannot negotiate attraction. You cannot argue someone back into desire. You cannot effort your way into relevance. Indifference means her brain has reassigned you. You're no longer a source of emotional regulation, excitement, or safety. You're a known quantity. And the human nervous system doesn't reopen closed loops easily. This isn't stubbornness, it's emotional finality. Why closure feels so one-sided. This is why breakups at this stage feel cruel. She seems prepared. You feel blindsided. That's not because she's heartless. It's because she grieved the relationship long before you knew it was dying. She processed the loss privately. You're processing it publicly. Two people, two timelines, one ending, the final illusion. Many people mistake indifference for a phase. They think, if I give it time, she'll feel again. But indifference isn't numbness. It's clarity. And clarity doesn't reverse itself. Not without a shock powerful enough to rewrite identity. And by the time indifference arrives, the relationship no longer has the emotional weight to create that shock. What this means for you. Here's the part that matters. Indifference is not a verdict on your worth. It's a signal about timing. You didn't fail in the moment you lost her. You lost her in the moments you didn't know were final, when repair stopped, when presence faded, when the relationship became maintenance instead of meaning. The hard wisdom. This is why the silent divorce is so devastating, because it teaches its lesson too late. It doesn't scream, it doesn't warn, it whispers. And by the time you hear it clearly, there's nothing left to answer back. Closing reflection. Most marriages don't end in court. They end in the nervous system. They end when one person no longer feels emotionally activated by the other. That's the real divorce. And it happens quietly. Years before anyone signs anything.